So thank you, Paul and Ravi and Jeanette. And interestingly, Dr. Paul said something about the myth. I'm from the communications business. We call it narrative, right? And every 5 years, I watch the election, and someone will come and say, they started life in a one-room flat, worked very hard, went to a good school, I repeat, good school, and then went to university, got a scholarship, and then worked in the army, became a general, and then now a minister. But what's interesting is the same narrative is now also shared by opposition members. So it's a myth that's being propagated. And what we in the communication business talk about is the value system. So the government and the PAP is able to create a value system which is a shared vision and a shared value system with the population, right? So it's very difficult for us to run anything that's counter to what the government is saying or proposing, right? So coming back to the topic of is there a moving escalator? Last time I checked, there are 250,000 millionaires in Singapore, more than any other world, right? Any other country in the world. Another report says we have 350,000 millionaires. And my good friend here, in 2018 or 2019, wrote an article saying that HDB is a ticking time bomb. Why? If we think about it, what constitutes the majority of the 250,000, right? It is property value. And today, BTO flats are worth $1 million, right? And if the value of these flats come down when they reach maturity, when the leases run out and they reach maturity, these millionaires are going to be zero heirs, right? And that's what's going to happen. So it is, in fact, a myth, if I can drive home the point, that is a real myth that has been propagated. When are we going to find out whether it's going to be in the next 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years, or when the leases run out? So what can we do right now? And I think that's where political action needs to be a lot more affirmative on our side. So I spoke about PAP, how they have been doing things. What my concern is in Singapore, there is a growing class divide. And earlier today, David asked me this question, what do you think about the problems with HDB houses? He gave me a very radical solution. Make everyone owners of the property. That means no more leases, everybody becomes owners. But that presents an intergenerational wealth problem, right? Because what happens to the next generation of people coming into the pipeline? So we need to think through these processes. And earlier today, someone asked me, was it you or Jeanette, about Liz Truss and why she only lasted 45 days, right? The Economist says that she has a shelf life of a lettuce. In fact, there are videos going on that lettuce actually survives longer than a 45-day-old Prime Minister. But what we need to understand is we cannot have knee-jerk policies. So policies need to be thought out, and we need to have such debates and conversation to make sure that all these policies are well discussed and implemented in the future. All right? Why do I say there's a class divide? Right? Little known fact, in 2011, I volunteered for SDP, and Dr. Chi sent me to a convention in Kuala Lumpur. It was by the Liberal Democrats. Was it the ASEAN?
Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats.
Okay, Council of Asian Liberal Democrats. Mouthful, huh? So I asked this guy from India. So they were talking about how the Indian economy was being liberated, and the reason why Indian economy back then was performing was because of political competition, right? Because back then they had Congress and then they had BJP, and because of political competition, economic competition improved. But Singapore's model, there's only one party, there's no political competition. But Singapore boasts the best economic performance in the region by far, right? We've got 250,000 millionaires. It's a myth, we argue. But his answer was, Singapore's economy is competitive internationally. But locally, we are not. What do I mean by that, right? If you look at the government's policies, it's very simple. They invite MNCs to come and set up shop in Singapore. And when they set up shop, they also bring in foreign talent and their spouses and so on. I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but that's a fact. And because of that, it also retards or stagnates some of the local wages. And what the local businesses do, businessmen do, we run a very localized economy, right? MNCs get labor from Singapore, which is much lower than what they would be able to procure or acquire in the US. So there's a cost arbitrage for them. They benefit from this system. And they're able to produce something and sell it in first-tier markets, international markets, mature economies. So they're able to drive a profit. But Singapore companies, if you really look at it, and they keep saying, PAP keep saying, okay, we look at Riau Archipelago. Let's build businesses that are regional. We can set up shop, and then we can go into Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on. But with a very strong Sing dollar and a very strong asset base, it becomes very costly to, especially with a strong currency, right? Why my $1 here is 3 ringgit, right? So if you're selling anything for $10, which is not much, it's 30 ringgit. And then it gets worse if you go into the inner parts of Southeast Asia. So Singapore businesses are struggling. And this is what I call a two-tier or two-track economy. There is the MNCs, there are the very rich businessmen who are able to tap into the global, international, tier 1 markets. Whereas the local guys, we are struggling with property prices, with rental, with wages. And if you're competing in local markets, if you're running a restaurant, you find it very difficult to make ends meet. And hence, wages have been depressed. I think earlier I was talking to Dr. Paul. He was telling me that, we were talking about how KFC2 said that a chicken rice is $24 in New York, and in Singapore it's only $4. And the question KFC2 asked was very simple. We shouldn't be asking why it's so expensive in New York or why it's so cheap in Singapore. And then immediate answer from Dr. Pandaya was very simple, because wages are suppressed. And the problem in Singapore is systemic. I mean, with higher rentals, you're not able to pay more, there's a margin squeeze, and if entrepreneurs and businesses are going to be profitable, and when I say profitable, I'm talking about even just breaking even, right? I'm not talking about huge, massive profits. You need to keep wages down, which is sad, because what that means is a class of Singaporeans are going to continue being the underbelly of the economy. They're never able to move out or move up, right? So I've spoken about some of the issues and problems. I hope Lim Tian is on the way. So let me talk about the urban poor. So I participated in the general elections in 2020. I went to some of the rental flats in Kebun Baru. There are 4 or 5 rental blocks. And when I speak to some of them, I mean, they're living in terrible living conditions, right? I talked to them, spoke to this lady, divorced. She had got 5 children, out of which 4 of them are suffering from cancer. It was really, heart-wrenching. Then I moved to the next house. The guy talks about, his kids are no longer looking after him. It's an empty nest. They're no longer supporting him. Then I asked why. Then he said, no, they're in and out of prison or drug rehabilitation center and so on. So there is a social class that is underserved. You know what? I asked someone, I will not mention the name, I asked, why is that so? Why isn't the government taking action to address and lift all these people? Why don't we have a social safety net? And the answer I got was, they want this underclass, the bottom 20%, to grovel at the MPS. Oh, MP, please help me. Give me $300, maybe $500. And so that it's a very important voter bank. So my argument is that these problems are systemic and maybe even deliberate, and it is engineered in such a way that there are the rich people, the elite, who will benefit by working in GLCs, getting $1 million salaries, and they are serving tier 1 markets, and then the rest of us are struggling, and then the underbelly of the economy, we keep them poor. And that is the conspiracy or the myth or the truth, right? So that's something that we need to explore today. Right, what is my answer? So before I go to the answer of how we're going to fix the problem, there's also the sandwich class, which we didn't talk about, right? There are a lot of us who are actually in the middle class, and I run the Independent, so we ran an article recently. This lady came out and said the husband makes $10,000 a month, but that's not sufficient to run a family income. And then immediately the netizens were up in arms. They said, I'm barely making $2,000. How dare you say 10,000 is not enough, right? And the problem with that is, if you're looking after your parents, and if your parents are elderly, you need to take care of their health expenses, and you have to take care of your kids, who are also maybe going through their university education. It puts a lot of strain on the middle class. So the sandwich generation, they are not investing adequately, right? Also, I think Ravi briefly mentioned about two classes of wealth, right? Or one is wealth generating income, the other one is working and wages, right? So if you're putting all the money back into expenses, you're not investing and making money and saving enough for your nest egg. Okay? And of course, which I'll quickly rattle off, is families with healthcare issues. I think Dr. Paul Tambaya spoke about it. The other two that's a bit close to my heart is I've come across a lot of families, broken families and single mothers. There was a report recently that women who are married and who are within a family framework tend to get promoted and get higher wages. So single mothers get the short end of the stick, if I can say it that way, right? And these are based on statistics. There was a CNBC report. I'm not sure whether that's different from Singapore, but assuming all things equal, Singaporean single mothers are also affected. Maybe they work part-time instead of working, having a full-time job. We can say that it's true, right? So that's one part. And in the video that Ravi shared about Tharman actually spoke about the lost generation, right? And in the lost generation, what he's saying is because of COVID, people are going to fall off the economic cliff and never be able to get back on their feet. But I've got a message for the senior minister. I think they've lost it. It's not just a lost generation. PAP has lost the plot completely, right? Okay, so what is the solution? I think we've all spoken about how we can identify the problems. What I like to see, this is more like a wish list. Again, this is my own personal view, not the views of the party that I represent, which is PSP. I like to see more homegrown enterprises, right? And this is a leveler of everything. Right? If we look at the American economy, and there's a lot of example peddled around saying that we've copied Thatcher or Reagan, we are neoliberal. But Singapore's economy is no American economy. We are not as robust, right? In fact, most of the assets are owned by GLCs. And because it's owned by GLCs, there is a rent-seeking economy. The government sucks up, the elite sucks all the money, and they are the only ones benefiting from the system. In America, the system is very different. Every 10, 20 years, you'll have a different billionaire. Bill Gates was a billionaire, or richest man on the earth in the 90s and 2000, but now is Elon Musk, right? So they keep changing hands. We don't have such a system. If you become rich, you're there forever. If you're poor, you're there forever as well. So we are not as dynamic as the American system. But what I like to see is more entrepreneurs and businesses being established and entering tier 1 markets. And by tier 1 markets, it's very clear, it's America, it's Australia, and Europe. Unless we can get a foothold in these markets with local brands, it's going to be very hard for us to compete, because there's a tier of, like I said, it's a 2-tier economy. The top tier is serving international markets. So we need to have a lot of local entrepreneurs actually moving up the ladder, so to speak. Okay, that's one part. I think Dr. Tamia spoke about the pension system. CPF interest rates are very low. I actually wrote an article about this for the Independent when we first started. Maybe it's a bit good to recap. The pension system was started by the British government when they, all over the world, they didn't want to take care of non-whites, simply put, right? So it is a laissez-faire system where the employer and the employee contributes, and the government is just purely an administrator, right? The government does not contribute. All right? Which part of the CPF contribution do you see the government giving money? We don't do that, right? So, but the government is managing our money. My problem with the current system is the markets, in good years, the markets can give you 6-7% returns, right? But we are being underpaid. We are only being paid 3%, 2%, whatever the prevailing rates are. So it's not competitive. Tharman then goes on to argue, saying that it should be packed over bank savings rates. Right? I think it's a very unfair comparison. We should peg it to the capitals market and say that in order to be competitive and for people to benefit better, even a 2 to 3% increase in the interest rates would benefit us a lot. So that's one of my recommendations, to have a competitive pension system. Okay, and the third point I'd like to talk about, which of course the government has been talking about this for many years, is to have a more robust capital market. If you're in the world of investments, actually just a backstory, 15 years ago I used to build investment banking systems for GK Go and CIB Bank and so on, so I've got a bit of knowledge about this. If you want to make any money, seriously, you shouldn't be putting into SGX, because it's just market returns, right? The American market's NASDAQ is volatile, and because of the volatility, it gives us the opportunity to move up and down. So there needs to be a bit of a cultural shift in terms of how we are managing money, and how we can actually move up the wealth spectrum, right? What's the near-term opportunity for us immediately? As you can, you've all read about it, there's ongoing trade tensions between China and US, right? This itself presents an opportunity for Singapore to become the hub. There have been talk that we should actually bring some of the NASDAQ, Chinese companies listed in NASDAQ and NYSE to Singapore. And what this means is it will have more capital inflow, and hopefully more locals participating in it will gain from this new trade paradigm shift, or whatever you want to call it. The other opportunity that's staring at us is if you look at what Biden has done recently, there has been a shift from a trans-Pacific to an Indo-Pacific strategy, right? So companies like Apple, Dell, and so on are going to move their manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing from China and Taiwan to India. It also presents us with great opportunity to do business with India, right? And don't be so myopic to think that, they're all coming here to take our jobs. Let's address that through a proper immigration policy, skills-based, and a meritocratic system, right? It's not a opening of floodgates, but there are also opportunities where we should be encouraging those companies to come and set up HQ in Singapore, so that local Singaporeans can benefit from job creation. I sound a bit like PAP. I think I'm going to get a lot of flack from this gentleman. But it works, okay? Okay, so what's the last thing that I want to say? 2 minutes left, not too bad for yarning. 2 minutes. What's the last thing? In an economy that's driven by free markets, what is the equalizer, right? You all can sit around the table and create jobs and so on, right? Better jobs for locals and all that. At the end of the day, it's not Ravi, me, Dr. Paul, or Jeanette that's going to create the job. It is going to be the local entrepreneurs who are going to do it, right? And the only way to manage this is by having a proper system of taxation and subsidies. If people are in the underclass, we need to provide more subsidies, right? And where do we find the money? And I don't find PAP's reasoning as being reasonable, right? They say that we are raiding the reserves. We will make the government bankrupt. I disagree with that. It's only by providing subsidies to the mother with kids who are, 4 kids who are suffering from cancer. By providing her with support, providing young families with support, that you can elevate them and lift them up to reasonable, proper levels, right? So also they've not defined what is a living wage for Singapore. What's the word Chan Chun Sing was saying? This was something that was debated in TOC many, many years ago.
Kueh lapis.
No, kueh lapis. Something about a wage, right? Median wage. There was a median wage.
Progressive wage?
Progressive wage model. No, not that. They've not. First of all, I think it's a living wage. I think they've not defined what's a living wage. Maybe we'll come back to it. We need to look at policies that work. We need to make sure that certain segments of the societies are looked after. And it's very important what we do today has got massive impact on what's going to happen tomorrow. And lastly, I'd like to thank my host, Mr. Ravi Filament, Jeanette, for being patient with me. And she's been reminding me that I'm running out of time. And it's been a real pleasure to be with a very distinguished guest who is Dr. Paul Tharman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kumaran.